What if I told you that there was a devastating natural disaster in the late Roman Empire, which has been almost completely forgotten, but whose importance and impact was probably much higher than many would give it credit for? On the 21st of July in the year AD 365, during the reign of the Emperors Valens in the east and Valentinian I in the west, there was a strong earthquake of the magnitude at least 8.3, possibly 8.5, in the west of the island of Crete. For 1 minute, the earth shook violently, and a huge rupture formed on the seafloor, which displaced huge amounts of water. And when that happens, a shock wave is created which travels at high speeds into all directions away from the epicenter. It was then, on that fateful day, that a very large and devastating tsunami hit many coastal cities of the Mediterranean Sea with, as we shall see, devastating impact onto the economy and trade of the late Roman Empire. It really must have been a devastating event. But don't be sad, because what if I told you that you can create your own store in a super easy manner and start creating an online business very fast with Build Your Store AI? With no upfront costs, minimal investment, and a manageable time commitment, it's an ideal side hustle that you can scale over time. An online business offers flexibility and significant growth potential. And this is how it works. It's really very easy. First, you begin by registering on the Build Your Store AI platform. And then you select your niche which aligns with your interests and market demand. Then you set up a Shopify, starting at only $1 for the first 30 days. You then follow the setup instructions, as Build Your Store AI provides clear and easy to follow steps to set up your Shopify store. You can even create your own app with a click of a button. The Build Your Store AI creates your unique online Shopify store. Then you register for a dropshipping software called AutoDS to streamline your product sourcing and order fulfillment, and then you connect it with a Shopify store that you just created. AutoDS is very easy to use, and then you can launch your store and start selling stuff. That's actually how easy it is, thanks to Build Your Store powered by AI. By following these simple steps that I laid out, you can launch a fully functional online store without any upfront costs or significant time investment. Start your e-commerce journey today and watch it grow into a thriving business. So then click the link in the description to get your free AI store builder today. On the 21st of July, in the first consulship of Valentinian and his brother, fearful dangers suddenly overspread the whole world, such as are related in no ancient fables or histories. For on that day, slightly after daybreak and heralded by a thick succession of fiercely shaken thunderbolts, the solidity of the whole earth was made to shake and shudder, and the sea was driven away. Its waves were rolled back, and it disappeared, so that the abyss of the depths was uncovered, and many shaped varieties of sea creatures were seen stuck in the slime. The great wastes of those valleys and mountains, which the very creation had dismissed beneath the vast whirlpools, at that moment, as it was given to believe, looked up at the sun's rays. Many ships then were stranded as if on dry land, and people wandered at will about the paltry remains of the waters to collect fish and the like in their hands. Then the roaring sea, as if insulted by its repulse, rises back in turn, and through the teeming shoals dashed itself violently on islands and extensive tracts of the mainland, and flattened innumerable buildings in towns or wherever they were found. Thus, in the raging conflict of the elements, the face of the earth was changed to reveal wondrous sights. For the mass of waters, returning when least expected, killed many thousands by drowning. And with the tides whipped up to a height as they rushed back, some ships, after the anger of the watery element had grown old, were seen to have sunk, and the bodies of people killed in shipwrecks lay there. faces up or down. Other huge ships, thrust out by the mad blasts, perched on the roofs of houses, as happened at Alexandria, and others were hurled nearly 2 miles, like the Laconian vessel near the town of Methone, which I saw when I passed by, yawning apart from long decay. This remarkable account from this dreadful event is by no other than the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, the famous late Roman historian who was a personal friend of the Emperor Julian, who accompanied Julian on many of his journeys. Ammianus correctly also characterized the different phases of the tsunami, wherein the water first recedes, giving a false impression to unsuspecting people that the sea is withdrawing, when in fact it then makes a forceful and brutal comeback, washing away everything in its path. It must have been an extremely forceful tsunami, since Ammianus wrote that a ship near the Greek city of Methone was hurled 2 miles or more than 3 kilometers inland, and that years later these shipwrecks could still be seen lying around all over the eastern Mediterranean, even kilometers away from the sea. The effects of the earthquake itself are still visible even today. The whole of western Crete was heaved up by several meters. For instance, 2 kilometers west of Paleokora on Crete, we can see a raised beach raised by about 9 meters, showing us sea caves that were once below sea level. There are many other such places to be found, for instance, many places on the island of Antikythera, famous from the Antikythera mechanism which was found in a shipwreck near the island. And many parts of that island are now between 1 and 2.7 meters higher than they were before 365 AD. But of course, the most devastating effect of this earthquake was the massive tsunami which it created, that killed many people and devastated or even completely destroyed many cities in the eastern part of Africa, in Egypt and the Levant, and of course in Greece itself, especially on the Peloponnese Peninsula. But the destruction reached as far as Sicily and Calabria, and even as far north as Dalmatia. And of course the south of Asia Minor was affected as well, as was actually the entire Aegeus. This numerical simulation shows the impact which the tsunami had and the areas of the Mediterranean that were affected. In some areas, the tsunami reached a height of 13 meters. It is hard to estimate how many people died, but it must have been tens of thousands. The city of Apollonia serves as an example to illustrate the incredible damage that had been inflicted onto the many coastal cities by the massive tsunami. Today, we find the city half submerged below sea level as a direct result of that event in 365. The city never fully recovered from that event, and this happened as well with many other cities. The largest city in the region was Crete, which had been founded by the Greeks in 631 BC, and it too must have sustained massive damage by the tsunami. Ammianus Marcellinus described the city as ancient but deserted. He probably was in that region only some years after that fateful day, and so hearing him talk about such a large city being deserted sounds very drastic. He certainly exaggerated that claim for dramatic effect, however, there must have been some truth in it. Then of course there is the city specifically mentioned by Ammianus Marcellinus, namely Methone. He wrote that he saw a Laconian vessel wreck near the city, apparently carried a great distance inland by the tsunami. Methone nowadays lies mostly underwater, a testament to the earthquake and following tsunami of 365. And then of course we also have to look at Alexandria, which in those times was the largest of all coastal cities of Africa, Egypt and the Levant. In Alexandria, it must have been especially tragic. Ammianus wrote that when the water receded, thousands of people came to the shoreline to see that strange spectacle, see the boats suddenly on dry land where before there had been water, see fish and other sea creatures suddenly on dry land, and see sand where not long before there had been the sea. But when the waves returned, this time much more massive, thousands of people drowned, and the tsunami reached quite high places, toppled many buildings, walls and columns, and caused destruction in many parts of the city. How many people died, we don't know exactly, but considering the insanely high population density of Alexandria, considering that, and Ammianus' account of thousands drowning, we can imagine that unfortunately many people were killed by the sudden onslaught of water in Alexandria. In fact, according to Ammianus and Sozomen, that event must have been so brutal and devastating that even in the late 6th century AD, the anniversary of the disaster was still commemorated annually in Alexandria as a day of horror. Based on numerical studies conducted in a paper on that matter, link in the description, the tsunami reached a height of 12 meters in this old city that Alexander had established 700 years before the disaster. Of course, the destruction on Crete itself must have also been very severe, but there it was more caused by the earthquake itself rather than by the tsunami. Another city that suffered greatly from the tsunami was Leptis Magna, the hometown of the Emperor Septimius Severus. It too, like most coastal cities in Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, suffered great damage from the tsunami. The city had already seen economic and demographic decline since the crisis of the 3rd century, but the tsunami further accelerated that decline. We can also clearly see the impact of the 365 AD tsunami on maps depicting the late Roman Empire and the period of the Great Migrations. For instance, I always wondered when looking at maps of the Vandal Kingdom why it never stretched further eastward and never seemed to have encompassed the cities of eastern Tripolitania, and why there was this strange stretch of no man's land between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Vandal Kingdom. Well, it turns out that many of these coastal cities in that area had already been in decline since that disaster, and so when the Vandals arrived, the cities were just entirely given up or had already been abandoned long ago by the Roman population that probably had fled eastward towards Egypt and Cyrenaica. Even though the coastal regions of Egypt and Cyrenaica had also been devastated, the influx of refugees from the western parts of Africa that had been overrun by the Vandals certainly helped in rebuilding many of those cities and reinvigorating them. But some cities were possibly never fully rebuilt, especially if they had been damaged beyond repair. Now, the impact of such a massive event onto trade and the economy of the Roman Empire must have been brutal, especially in a time where not long later huge Germanic invasions would begin. Between that event and the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where the Eastern Romans lost against the Goths in a brutal defeat, which would have dire consequences for the Western Roman Empire, there were only 13 years. In that time, trade was massively disrupted. Many ports had been destroyed, many ships had been destroyed, and repairing all that damage, of course, would take a long time. Time which the Roman Empire unfortunately did not have. How long the disruption of trade lasted, we can only speculate, but the impact must have been noticeable. And it is not unreasonable to speculate that this event really came at the worst possible time, when the Roman Empire would have needed all its strength to deal with the massive Germanic invasions that would soon begin. It must also be noted that the event was seen by the pagans as a punishment by the gods for the death of the Emperor Julian, and this might have further exacerbated the growing polarization of the late Roman Empire due to the rise of Christianity and the growing religious intolerance which had begun under the sons of Constantine. So apart from a direct impact through destroyed cities and many dead people and disrupted trade, this event might also have increased polarization and religious conflicts. Hence, this disaster, it is pretty clear to say, certainly didn't affect the late Roman Empire in a positive way, and might have contributed to its decline because of the insanely bad timing when this happened. Many actually think that there was a series of earthquakes between 350 and 450 AD, which got convoluted into one single event. And indeed, many places show repeated damage from several earthquakes and floodings. So if there were multiple events that caused destruction of coastal cities in that pivotal 100-year period of the Great Migration, well then, this would have been an additional and probably quite forgotten factor that certainly wasn't good for the Roman Empire. And in that crucial time period, where it would have needed things to go well for once. And so we see that natural disasters can really cause a lot of damage. And the tsunami of 365 AD certainly should not be forgotten as a brutal contributing factor to the decline of the Roman Empire. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or via YouTube membership, because it is your support which makes this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. And I would especially like to thank our new Caesar supporter, Carlitox Radovitsky. Thank you so much, Carlitox Radovitsky, for supporting Maiorianus in such a generous way. Majorian would be proud. And of course, I want to thank everybody who is supporting Maiorianus. You people are amazing. And if you want to learn more about how earthquakes destroyed ancient Rome, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about how climate change negatively affected the Roman Empire, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.